In this, our second module, studying the foundations of account management, we're going to look at what makes the most successful account managers successful. During your group discussion, we'll give you an exercise to look at a range of knowledge and skills and to discuss their relative importance in your specific situation. But first, in this self-study section, I want to look at some of the common traits of highly successful account managers. Now, how can we be so sure that these are the right traits? Well, what I'm going to share with you is the result of our working with many hundreds of successful account managers over many different industries, different countries, and many years. Different account managers, of course, will do different things differently. There's no common, uniform model for success. Similarly, different countries and industries work differently, so you have to adapt to meet the specific demands and needs. However, when we study highly successful account managers, we do notice some common themes, and we can summarize these common themes into 5 traits. Now, I'm not saying you'll always see every successful manager displaying all of these traits all of the time. But I am saying that we're more likely to see successful managers displaying these traits and less successful managers very often showing the opposite of one of these traits. So I'm going to explain these traits to you over the course of this module, and then I'm going to ask you to take a view. So let's start with the first trait, which focuses on the importance of objectivity and measurement. In our Elite Managers seminar, I often introduce this topic by asking managers to raise their hand if they consider themselves to be good drivers. Now, generally everyone, well, almost everyone, raises their hand. I make a quick note of those who don't raise their hand to ensure I never accept a ride in their car. And then I ask the managers to raise their hand if they consider themselves to be above average drivers. Again, almost everyone raises their hand. And finally, I ask them to raise their hand if they believe they're in the top 25% of car drivers, and typically 75% of them will raise their hand. Now, you don't need to be a mathematical genius to recognize that if 75% of us believe we're in the top 25%, well then 50% of us must be wrong. Incidentally, I asked the same question, or similar question, to sales managers from across the pharmaceutical industry, in this case to raise their hand if they believe that their sales team they manage would be in the top quarter of teams across their industry, and about 80% of them raised their hands. So what's going on here? Why do so many of us think we're so much better than we really are? Most of us, well, especially those of us from a sales background, tend to start off with a very high opinion of our own abilities, and then we unconsciously identify examples to confirm our belief and to ignore evidence which is not supporting our belief. And psychologists have long recognized this phenomenon, and they call it confirmation bias. Confirmation bias explains why two managers can look at the same situation and form completely different conclusions. And it also explains why relatively so few account managers actively seek out additional training support. But the good news is that the mere fact you're watching this video puts you into the more enlightened group of managers, and ultimately means that you're going to be more successful because you'll be looking for more opportunities to develop. Now, confirmation bias can cause big problems for the account manager. There's a danger that you ignore evidence which suggests you have, or perhaps you will have, a problem with the customer. You might assume that the customer has a more favorable view of you and your company. Have you ever heard of an account manager who suddenly loses a customer or loses a contract without apparently any prior warning? Well, the chances are high that there was plenty of warning, but the account manager wasn't able or willing to see it. Let's consider another question. Pick one of your best customers. Do you believe you have a good relationship with this customer? Now, when I ask this question, most managers say, yeah, of course I do. But how do you know? Well, most managers will say they know because the customer is buying a lot from them. But is this really good evidence that you have a good relationship? Oh, and by the way, what do we mean by a good relationship? Is my version of a good relationship the same as your version? And what do we mean by an above average driver? We just don't know. And this is a big part of the problem. We tend to deal in words which sound fine, but they don't really have any clear meaning. Words like good, above average, high quality don't really mean anything. My version of good may not be the same as your view. So we tend to use the same words, but we might mean completely different things. Highly successful account managers tend to recognize this, and they avoid these meaningless words, and they instead aim to use more objective measures. So these managers recognize that they need to, well, they'll naturally take a more positive view of themselves and their business. So they actively seek objective evidence to support their view, and they'll be able to provide measures to ensure they're really objective. So let's now go back to our earlier question. Do you have a good relationship with your customer? Take an objective view. What evidence do you have? How could you measure that? I'm going to leave you with that question. Have a think about it, make some notes in your workbook, and then I'll ask you to discuss possible answers during your next group discussion.